Welcome to, or back to, Forgotten Hollywood, the channel where I take you back in time to show you the movies, shows, and actors that have faded over the years. Many people my age remember Lindsay Lohan's film debut as Annie James and Hallie Parker, twins separated as babies and reunited at summer camp. However, I have a harder time finding people my age that ever saw the original twins, Sharon McKendrick and Susan Evers, played by Hayley Mills. Now, you might not see this as a problem, but having just rewatched the original, not seen since my childhood, I realized a few things about the remake, namely all the things that made no sense. To be clear, I did see the original film, 1961's The Parent Trap, when I was little. Very little. In fact, there were only a few moments that I could remember, such as the catchy song and Maureen O'Hara punching Brian Keith in the eye. But there were several other moments I had long forgotten by the time I saw the remake in 1998. Unfortunately, it was these moments that the filmmakers had chosen to replicate to pay homage to the original, and frankly were out of context and even out of place in the 90s version. There are many of these tributes in the remake, but I'm going to focus on the 5 that make the least sense. To start with, let's look at how the girls got put into isolation. In the remake, their cabins were locked in a feud that the camp director ends by placing the twins, and only the twins, in isolation after Haley and her friends trash Annie's cabin.
You and you pack your bags!
Now, the audience knows the root of the problem between the two groups is the tension between the twins. However, it is still weird that the other girls get off without so much as a slap on the wrist. In the original, the cabin, called a tent, was trashed by Susan and her friends while Sharon and the other girls were sleeping. This mess caused them to miss out on a party their camp was hosting for a nearby boys' camp. So they played a prank on Susan by cutting off the back of her dress during the dance. Susan saw Sharon laughing and lost it. The two girls started a catfight that sends them crashing into the refreshments table. Since only Sharon and Susan caused the mess, they are the ones punished. So it wasn't the pranks, it was the very public fight that got them put into isolation. Something that makes a lot more sense than 2 girls paying the price of 6. Speaking of punishments, there is also the matter of how the girls got to the isolation cabin. In the remake, the entire camp marched in rows like a military unit, where the rest of the camp was released to other camp activities while Hallie and Annie were put in the cabin.
Okay, girls. The rest of you, back to your activities. You two. The isolation cabin.
Interesting that the directors, reluctant to punish the other girls for taking part in the pranks, would make the entire camp march as part of Annie and Hallie's punishment. This never made sense to me until I rewatched the original. Here, Sharon and Susan are marched to the isolation cabin, while the other campers follow them, whistling as a way of teasing them for getting into trouble. More and more girls join in until the director turns around and tells them to get back to their activities. This spontaneous action of what is essentially bullying is far more realistic, as kids often are cruel. On the other hand, marching the whole camp to the isolation cabin doesn't make sense unless the camp director is trying to add to Hallie and Annie's humiliation by showing everyone where they ended up. Kids doing it I could understand, but adults should know better. The isolation cabin brings us to my next 2 points. The first is the wall of pictures, which belong to the 2 California girls, Susan and Hallie. This is a bonding moment in both films as wind and rain damage the pictures, causing Sharon and Annie to hurry over and help.
Any of your pictures ruined? Only the beautiful Leo DiCaprio. Who? You've never heard of Leonardo DiCaprio? How far away is London anyway?
Here is why this doesn't make sense. This movie came out in the summer of 1998, a full 7 months after the release of blockbuster mega hit Titanic. There is no way a preteen girl living in a major city like London would have never heard of Leonardo DiCaprio. Not in 1998. It's like claiming that people in England don't know who Chris Evans is because he's American. There is such a thing as an international star. By contrast, the original sets up from the beginning that Sharon is extremely sheltered, and some might even say controlled, by an overbearing grandmother, which leads to tensions when she gets her hair cut, but that's another matter. Naturally, being a sheltered child, She is not familiar with pop culture and mistakenly thinks that pop singer Ricky Nelson is Susan's boyfriend. It is particularly relevant that Ricky Nelson is a singer, since singers are known by their music and not always by face or name, unless you are into that genre. You can name the biggest country singer in the world, but if you are talking to a hip-hop fan, they may not know who you're talking about. I know I couldn't name 5 current pop singers if my life depended on it, but I know people who can name a dozen. The final part of the isolation cabin that makes more sense in the context of the original is how the girls discovered they are twins. Come to think of it, context has nothing to do with it. The original just plain made more sense. In the remake, Annie and Haley realize that they each have half of their parents' wedding photo.
This is so freaky. Okay. On the count of 3, we'll show them to each other, okay? Okay. 1, 2, 3. That's my dad. That's my mom.
For this to work, it would mean that Liz and Nick tore their picture in half and kept the half with their ex for a decade, both gifting it to their daughters at some point, who then both brought the damaged pictures to camp. That's an awful lot of coincidences. In the original, only Mitch kept a picture of his ex-wife, but got rid of it after his daughter found it. This speaks to the character of Mitch and how much he missed Maggie, but let her go rather than face the truth with his daughter. An example of show don't tell. Anyway, because Susan knew what her mother looked like, she was surprised to see that Sharon had a picture of her.
I don't understand. What are you doing with her picture? It's my mother. But it's my mother too.
This is how you can have the same result in a way that both makes sense and doesn't need the stars to align just so on the 3rd Tuesday of a month starting with M. The final moment I want to mention is when the ex-wife suggests that the fiancé goes on the camping trip, only to back out at the last minute to ensure a miserable trip. In the remake, this comes out of the blue, and it's clear to the audience anyway, that this is Liz's own act of sabotage. Somewhat believable, but not as much as it was in 1961. You see, Maggie knew almost as soon as she reached California that there was another woman, one Sharon didn't like. From the very start, she was on the twins' side against Vicky. So it comes as no surprise when she arranges for the camping trip to include her as a final act of sabotage. Natural character progression, as opposed to acting out of character for the woman who had previously supported Nick's decision to remarry. Now, I will not go so far as to say that the 1998 remake is a bad movie. I enjoyed it as a kid and still do as an adult, and the same can be said for the original. It's a classic story. My point is that when you want to give a nod to an original in a remake, it helps to have the context. Annie being from London doesn't automatically mean she is sheltered. If you want that to be an element of the character, as it was with Sharon, it must be established. Show, don't tell. Can you still enjoy the remake without the context of the original? Yes, but you may be left a little confused. Thank you for watching. What are your thoughts on The Parent Trap? Do you prefer the original or the remake? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy this sort of content. Also, click that bell to receive notifications. Let me know if there's another remake you would like compared to the original, and I will catch up with you next time.